I never thought I'd be the kind of person who could spend 2 years plotting someone's downfall. I always considered myself forgiving, maybe even too forgiving. But there's something about discovering that your best friend of 15 years has been secretly working to destroy your life, that changes you in ways you can't predict. My name is Charlotte, and this is the story of how I watched my closest friend smile to my face while she systematically dismantled everything I'd built, and how I made sure she faced every consequence she deserved. I met Gemma when we were 11 years old, on the first day of secondary school in Manchester. She was crying in the bathroom because some older girls had made fun of her accent. She'd just moved from Birmingham, and her vowels were different enough to make her a target. I found her there between classes, mascara running down her cheeks even though we were far too young to be wearing makeup, and I handed her a tissue and told her those girls were idiots. From that moment on, we were inseparable. We went through everything together: puberty, first boyfriends, A-levels, university applications. When my mum got sick with breast cancer during our GCSEs, Gemma was there every single day. She'd bring homework to the hospital, sit with me in waiting rooms, hold my hand when I couldn't stop shaking. When her parents divorced during sixth form, I returned the favor. We were more than friends. We were sisters in every way that mattered. After university, we both ended up in London. I'd studied business and marketing, landing a junior position at a mid-sized advertising agency. Gemma had done English literature and struggled to find her footing for a while, bouncing between temp jobs and retail positions. I helped her polish her CV, practiced interview questions with her, and eventually recommended her for an administrative role at my company when one opened up. That was my first mistake, though I wouldn't understand that for years. By the time we were 28, I'd worked my way up to account manager, handling some of our biggest clients. Gemma had moved into a coordinator role in a different department, and we'd go for drinks every Friday, share a flat in Brixton, and talk about our futures. I was dating a man named James, a software developer I'd met through a dating app. He was kind, funny, and seemed genuinely interested in my career ambitions, rather than threatened by them. Gemma was perpetually single, claiming she was too focused on her career to date, though I noticed she never seemed to put much effort into advancing either. Looking back, I can see the signs I missed: the way Gemma's eyes would flicker when I talked about my promotions, the slight edge in her voice when she congratulated me on landing a new client, the questions that seemed supportive but were actually probing for weaknesses. But when you've loved someone for 15 years, you don't see those things. You explain them away. You tell yourself you're imagining it. The first crack in our friendship appeared about 6 months before everything fell apart. I'd been working on a major pitch for a luxury skincare brand, one of those accounts that could make or break a career. I'd been developing the concept for months, staying late, coming in on weekends. I kept all my notes in a shared drive at work, organized meticulously in folders I thought only I accessed. The night before the presentation, I mentioned to Gemma that I was nervous but excited. She hugged me and told me I'd be brilliant. The next morning, I walked into the conference room to find my creative director, Simon, looking at me with barely concealed frustration. Apparently, someone had anonymously emailed the client's marketing director claiming that our agency had a history of plagiarizing concepts. The email included screenshots of similar campaigns from other brands, suggesting that my pitch was derivative. It wasn't true. I'd done extensive research to ensure my ideas were original. But the damage was done. The client was spooked, and they decided to go with another agency. I was devastated. Simon believed me when I explained that I hadn't plagiarized anything, but the loss of that account was significant. There was an internal investigation, emails were traced, but somehow the anonymous sender had covered their tracks well enough that IT couldn't identify them. I suspected a competitor had somehow gotten wind of our pitch and sabotaged us. It never once occurred to me to suspect Gemma. A month later, I noticed something strange. Gemma had been distant, claiming she was overwhelmed with work, but I'd see her laughing with colleagues from my department, people she'd never shown interest in before. One of them was Marcus, a junior account executive who'd always been a bit too ambitious for his own good. I'd caught him trying to take credit for other people's work more than once. I mentioned to Gemma that I didn't trust him, and she'd nodded sympathetically, agreeing that he seemed slimy. 3 weeks later, I saw them having lunch together in a restaurant around the corner from the office. When I asked her about it, she said they'd just bumped into each other and decided to grab a bite. I believed her. James proposed to me on a rainy evening in October, in our favorite restaurant in Covent Garden. It wasn't elaborate or showy, just sincere and perfect. I said yes immediately, and when I called Gemma to tell her, she screamed with excitement and demanded to be my maid of honor. I agreed without hesitation. She was my best friend. Who else would stand beside me on the most important day of my life? The engagement seemed to trigger something in Gemma. She became intensely involved in the wedding planning, almost too involved. She had opinions on everything: the venue, the flowers, the dress, the guest list. At first I appreciated her enthusiasm, but slowly I started to notice that her suggestions always seemed designed to make things more complicated or expensive. She'd recommend vendors who turned out to be unreliable. She'd suggest dates that conflicted with key guests' schedules. She'd show me dresses that looked terrible on my body type while insisting they were perfect. I told myself she was just excited. I told myself she had different tastes than me. I told myself that 15 years of friendship meant I owed her the benefit of the doubt. The second sabotage at work happened 4 months before my wedding. I'd been given another major account, this time for a chain of boutique hotels. The pitch went perfectly, and we won the business. I was thrilled, especially because this account came with a significant bonus and a likely promotion to senior account manager. I shared the news with Gemma over wine at our flat, and she hugged me and said she was so proud of me. 2 weeks later, the client's head of marketing called Simon directly to complain. Apparently, confidential information about their upcoming rebranding had been leaked to a competing hotel chain. The leak was traced back to an email sent from my work computer during a lunch break when I'd left it unlocked. I was called into Simon's office and questioned extensively. I swore I hadn't sent any emails during that time. I'd been at a sandwich shop with James, and I had receipts and CCTV footage to prove it. The investigation revealed that someone had accessed my computer while I was away. The building's security wasn't sophisticated enough to track exactly who, and the email had been deleted from my sent folder, suggesting the person knew what they were doing. I was officially cleared, but the client terminated our contract anyway. Simon told me privately that he believed me, but that the partners were starting to wonder if I was a liability. I was shaken. 2 major incidents in less than a year, both seemingly designed to destroy my reputation. I started to wonder if I had an enemy I didn't know about, a colleague who resented my success, a competitor with a grudge. I never, not once, considered Gemma. She was the one I confided in about my suspicions. She listened sympathetically, held my hand, told me that someone was clearly jealous of my talent, and promised to keep her ears open for any gossip. The realization began with something small, as these things often do. It was a Saturday afternoon, about 3 months before the wedding. Gemma had gone out to meet a friend, and I was home alone, looking for a book I'd lent her months ago. I knew she kept books in a box under her bed, so I knelt down to check. The box was there, but it wasn't full of books. It was full of folders, printouts, and a notebook. I wish I could say I respected her privacy. I wish I could say I put the box back and never looked. But something in my gut told me to keep going. Call it intuition. Call it the universe finally giving me a sign. I pulled out the notebook and opened it to a random page. The handwriting was Gemma's, neat, precise, familiar, but the words were anything but. Charlotte got the hotel account. Of course she did. Everything always works out for Charlotte. She waltzes through life, getting everything handed to her while the rest of us struggle. She doesn't deserve any of it. She's not that talented. She's just lucky and pretty, and everyone falls over themselves to help her. I'm so sick of standing in her shadow. My hands were shaking as I turned the page. The email worked. Simon questioned her for an hour. She looked terrified. Good. Maybe now she'll understand what it feels like to have something taken away from you. James comforted her all night. Of course he did. Perfect Charlotte with her perfect boyfriend. I wonder how perfect she'd seem to him if he knew the truth about who she really is. I didn't understand what she meant by the truth about who I really was. There was no truth to reveal. I had no secrets, no scandals, nothing to hide. But as I kept reading, I began to understand that Gemma had been constructing an alternate version of me in her mind for years. A version where I was selfish, manipulative, and undeserving of everything I had. A version where she was the victim of my success. The notebook went back years. There were entries from university where she'd written about how unfair it was that I'd gotten a first while she'd scraped by with a 2-2. Entries from when I'd gotten my first promotion, filled with venom and resentment. Entries about James, about how it wasn't fair that I'd found someone so wonderful while she was alone, and how she was sure I didn't appreciate him properly. But the most damning entries were recent. Detailed plans for how to undermine me at work. Notes about accessing my computer when I wasn't looking. A draft of the anonymous email that had sabotaged my skincare pitch. A list of wedding vendors she'd recommended specifically because she knew they were unreliable, with notes about how confused I'd be when things went wrong. And then I found the folder about James. Inside were screenshots of text conversations between Gemma and James. Except they weren't normal conversations. They were flirtatious, intimate. Gemma had been messaging my fiancé for months, and from the screenshots, it was clear she'd been trying to seduce him. But what made my blood run cold was that James's responses were friendly but distant. He wasn't taking the bait. He kept steering conversations back to me, to the wedding, to us. And in Gemma's notes beside the screenshots, she'd written, "He's not biting. Need another approach. Maybe if I can make Charlotte look bad enough, he'll start to see the real her." I sat on Gemma's bedroom floor for what felt like hours, the box in front of me, my entire understanding of my life rearranging itself like shattered glass, reforming into a different picture. 15 years. 15 years of friendship, of trust, of love, and it had all been a lie. Not all of it, maybe. Surely some of it had been real. But enough of it was poisoned that I couldn't tell the difference anymore. I heard her key in the door, and I moved quickly. I took photos of every page, every screenshot, every damning piece of evidence. My hands were steady even though my heart was pounding. Some survival instinct had kicked in, overriding the panic and the heartbreak. I needed proof. I needed to document everything before I decided what to do with it. By the time Gemma walked into the flat, calling out a cheerful hello, I was sitting on the sofa with a cup of tea, the box back under her bed, exactly where I'd found it. "Hey, you okay?" she asked, dropping her bag on the counter. "You look a bit pale." "Just tired," I said. "Long week." She nodded sympathetically and started telling me about her afternoon, something about the friend she'd met up with, some drama at a cafe. I listened and nodded and made appropriate sounds while inside, my mind was racing. I couldn't confront her. Not yet. Not until I understood the full scope of what she'd done and figured out how to make her face the consequences. That night, I lay awake next to James, watching him sleep. He had no idea. He'd been loyal to me the entire time, and he didn't even know he'd been targeted. I felt a wave of gratitude for him, for his decency, for the fact that Gemma's manipulation hadn't worked. But I also felt rage. Pure, cold rage at the woman sleeping in the room next door, who had tried to steal my fiancé, just like she'd tried to steal my career. I spent the next few weeks gathering more information. I was careful, methodical, and patient. I started paying attention to Gemma's movements at work, noticing how often she found excuses to be near my desk, how friendly she was with Marcus, how she always seemed to know things about accounts she had no business knowing. I also started looking into her history more carefully. I reached out to old classmates from university, casual conversations that seemed innocent, but were designed to extract information, and what I learned was illuminating. Several people remembered Gemma being bitter about my academic success. One woman recalled Gemma spreading rumors about me during our second year, claiming I'd cheated on an exam. I'd never known about those rumors. They hadn't spread far enough to reach me or affect me. But they existed. The pattern went back further than I'd realized. Gemma had been jealous of me for years, maybe even from the beginning, and she'd been hiding it so well that I'd never suspected a thing. I also discovered something else. Gemma had been applying for jobs in my department for months. She wanted to move from administration into account management. She'd been rejected twice, and according to the HR coordinator I'd befriended, her applications had listed accomplishments that didn't quite match her actual work history. She'd been inflating her achievements, taking credit for projects she'd barely contributed to, and in her cover letters, she'd specifically mentioned wanting to work more closely with the talented team in accounts, which I now understood meant she wanted closer access to me and my work. The pieces were falling into place. Gemma didn't just resent me. She wanted to be me. She wanted my job, my fiancé, my life. And when she couldn't have those things, she decided to destroy them instead. I considered my options carefully. I could confront her directly, but that would give her a chance to spin the narrative, to make herself the victim, to claim I'd invaded her privacy and found nothing but a personal diary taken out of context. I could go to the police, but what crime had she actually committed? Sending anonymous emails wasn't illegal. Being a terrible friend wasn't a prosecutable offense. No, if I wanted justice, I would have to be strategic. I would have to use her own methods against her. I would have to plan and wait and strike when she least expected it. The first step was protecting my job. I went to Simon and asked for a private meeting. I explained that I had reason to believe someone inside the company was sabotaging my work. I didn't name Gemma directly, not yet, but I asked if we could implement some additional security measures around my projects. Access logs for my files, a different login system for my computer. He agreed, looking concerned but not disbelieving. The previous incidents had shaken his faith but not destroyed it. He still saw me as a valuable employee, and he was willing to give me the benefit of the doubt. The next step was harder. I had to tell James. I chose a quiet Sunday morning after breakfast, while we were still in our pajamas with coffee cups in hand. I showed him the screenshots I'd taken of Gemma's messages to him, the ones she'd saved and annotated. I watched his face go from confusion to shock to anger. "I had no idea," he said, his voice tight. "I mean, I knew she was being a bit flirty sometimes, but I thought she was just like that. I never encouraged it, Charlotte, I swear." "I know," I said. "I saw your responses. You were perfect. She just couldn't accept that." He looked at the screenshots again, his jaw clenching. "What kind of person does this? You're supposed to be her best friend." "I thought I was." We sat in silence for a long time, holding hands, processing the betrayal together. James wanted to confront Gemma immediately, to throw her out of the flat, to tell everyone what she'd done, but I convinced him to wait. I had a plan, and it required patience. The wedding was now 2 months away. Gemma was still my maid of honor, still smiling and helpful and pretending to be my closest ally. Every interaction with her felt like swallowing glass, but I forced myself to play along. I needed her to feel secure. I needed her to think she was winning. Meanwhile, I was building my case. I saved every email, every text, every piece of evidence. I documented the vendors she'd recommended and the problems they'd caused. I tracked her movements at work, noting every time she lingered near my desk or spoke with Marcus. I was creating a paper trail, a comprehensive record of her sabotage that would be impossible to deny or explain away. The opportunity I'd been waiting for came 6 weeks before the wedding. Simon called me into his office to tell me we'd been approached by a major cosmetics brand for a rebranding campaign. It was potentially the biggest account of my career. He wanted me to lead the pitch, and he was giving me full autonomy to build my team. I accepted with gratitude, and then I did something unexpected. I asked if Gemma could be temporarily assigned to help with administrative support for the project. Simon looked surprised, but he agreed. After all, we were best friends. It made sense that I'd want her involved. What Simon didn't know was that I was setting a trap. I created a special folder for the cosmetics pitch, filled with documents and strategies and creative concepts. But I also included a few pieces of misinformation, fake client preferences, false meeting dates, dummy budget figures, and I made sure Gemma had access to that folder. Then I waited. It took less than a week. The cosmetics company's marketing director called Simon to ask why we'd sent conflicting information about the project timeline. Apparently someone had contacted them claiming to be from our agency, providing details that didn't match what Simon had discussed with them. The details matched the misinformation in my folder exactly. This time we were prepared. The new security measures meant we could track exactly who had accessed that folder and when. The logs showed that Gemma had opened the documents multiple times, including just hours before the misleading information was sent to the client. Simon called both of us into his office. I watched Gemma's face as he explained what had happened, as he showed her the access logs, as he asked her directly if she had anything to say. She went pale, then red. Then she started stammering excuses. She said she'd just been reviewing the files out of curiosity. She said she hadn't contacted anyone. She said there must be a mistake. But the evidence was overwhelming. It had traced the communication to an anonymous email account, but the IP address matched a coffee shop around the corner from our office, one where Gemma was known to spend her lunch breaks. They'd even found a witness who remembered seeing her on her laptop at the relevant time. Gemma turned to me, desperation in her eyes. "Charlotte, tell them I would never do this. We're best friends. I'm your maid of honor. Why would I sabotage you?" I looked at her for a long moment. 15 years of friendship, countless memories, and all of it poisoned by jealousy and lies. "I don't know, Gemma," I said quietly. "Why would you?" The pattern went back further than I'd realized. Gemma had been jealous of me for years, maybe even from the beginning, and she'd been hiding it so well that I'd never suspected a thing. I also discovered something else. Gemma had been applying for jobs in my department for months. She wanted to move from administration into account management. She'd been rejected twice, and according to the HR coordinator I'd befriended, her applications had listed accomplishments that didn't quite match her actual work history. She'd been inflating her achievements, taking credit for projects she'd barely contributed to, and in her cover letters, she'd specifically mentioned wanting to work more closely with the talented team in accounts, which I now understood meant she wanted closer access to me and my work. She was escorted from the building that afternoon. The official reason was a serious breach of company policy and confidentiality. She wasn't arrested because technically, no crime had been committed that could be easily prosecuted. But her career at that company was over, and in our industry, word travels fast. Within weeks, everyone in London advertising knew that Gemma had been fired for sabotaging a colleague. But I wasn't finished. The night after Gemma was fired, I went back to our flat. She was there, packing her things, mascara smudged from crying. When she saw me, she started pleading. "Charlotte, please, I'm sorry. I know I made mistakes, but we've been friends for so long. You can't just throw that away. I was jealous, okay? I admit it. I was jealous of your success, but I never meant for things to go this far. I never wanted to actually hurt you." I listened in silence. Then I pulled out my phone and showed her the photos of her notebook. Page after page of hatred and planning and venom. Her face went white. "You went through my things," she whispered. "You sabotaged my career, tried to seduce my fiancé, and deliberately undermined my wedding planning. I think going through your things was pretty mild in comparison." She stared at me, and for the first time, I saw the real Gemma. Not the smiling best friend. Not the supportive confidant. The bitter, envious woman who had been hiding behind a mask for years. "You always had everything," she said, her voice turning hard. "Everything just fell into your lap. The grades, the jobs, the boyfriend. Do you have any idea what it's like to stand next to someone like you? To always be second best? To know that no matter how hard you try, people will always prefer Charlotte? So you decided to destroy me instead of building yourself up." I looked at her for a long moment. 15 years of friendship, countless memories, and all of it poisoned by jealousy and lies. "I don't know, Gemma," I said quietly. "Why would you?" The pattern went back further than I'd realized. Gemma had been jealous of me for years, maybe even from the beginning, and she'd been hiding it so well that I'd never suspected a thing. I also discovered something else. Gemma had been applying for jobs in my department for months. She wanted to move from administration into account management. She'd been rejected twice, and according to the HR coordinator I'd befriended, her applications had listed accomplishments that didn't quite match her actual work history. She'd been inflating her achievements, taking credit for projects she'd barely contributed to, and in her cover letters, she'd specifically mentioned wanting to work more closely with the talented team in accounts, which I now understood meant she wanted closer access to me and my work. "You never even noticed. You were so wrapped up in your perfect little life that you never saw how much I was struggling. You'd get promoted and come home to celebrate, and I was supposed to just smile and be happy for you while I was stuck in a dead-end admin job. Do you know how many times I applied for positions in your department? Do you know how many times I was rejected while you just kept climbing higher?" I felt something shift inside me. For a moment, I could almost understand her. The frustration, the feeling of being left behind, the resentment that builds when you measure yourself against someone else and always come up short. But understanding wasn't the same as forgiving. "I want you out of the flat by the end of the week," I said. "I'll be staying with James until then." "Charlotte, please. The wedding is off. I mean, you're off. You're not my maid of honor. You're not my friend. You're not anything to me anymore." She started crying again, but I felt nothing. I'd used up all my tears over the past few weeks, mourning a friendship that I now understood had been dying for years, maybe had never been as real as I'd believed. I left her there and went to James's flat. He held me while I told him everything that had happened, and for the first time since I'd found that notebook, I let myself fully grieve. Not just for the friendship, but for the version of myself who had trusted so completely and been so utterly wrong. The weeks that followed were a blur of reorganization. Gemma moved out of the flat, and I found a new roommate through a colleague at work. The wedding planning continued without her, and my sister stepped in as maid of honor with only a few weeks' notice. She was brilliant about it, asking no questions, just offering support. But I couldn't shake the feeling that Gemma hadn't faced enough consequences. She'd lost her job and her best friend, but she still had her family, her other friends, her ability to spin the narrative however she wanted. I knew she would eventually find another position, rebuild her life, and probably tell everyone that I'd turned on her for no reason. I wanted the truth out there. I wanted people to know what she'd really done. So I made a decision that some might call petty, but I considered justice. I reached out to Marcus. He agreed to meet me at a pub near the office, clearly curious about why I wanted to talk. Marcus was ambitious and self-serving, and I'd never liked him, but I also knew he was a gossip and that he'd been close to Gemma during her final months at the company. "I wanted to ask you about Gemma," I said, sliding into the booth across from him. "I know you two were friends." He looked uncomfortable. "We were friendly. I wouldn't say friends exactly. She told me some things before she left. About conversations you two had, about plans you discussed." His discomfort increased visibly. "What kind of plans?" "Plans to undermine me, to sabotage my accounts, to make me look incompetent so there'd be room for both of you to advance." Marcus's face went through several expressions: fear, calculation, denial. I watched him weigh his options, trying to figure out how much I knew and what I planned to do with the information. "Look," he said finally. "Whatever Gemma told you, she was the one driving everything. I listened to her vent sometimes. I never actually did anything." "But you knew what she was doing." He hesitated, then nodded. "I suspected. She was always asking questions about your accounts, about your computer password, about your schedule. I should have said something, but I didn't want to get involved." "And the skincare pitch? The one that got sabotaged?" Marcus looked down at his drink. "She asked me to forward an email to her, said it was something you'd approved. I didn't know what she was planning to do with it." So Marcus had been complicit after all. Not the mastermind, but a willing accomplice, too cowardly to act but too selfish to warn me. I felt disgust rising in my throat. "Here's what's going to happen," I said, keeping my voice calm. "You're going to tell Simon everything. You're going to explain your role in what Gemma did, and you're going to do it voluntarily, before I have to do it for you. If I do that, I'll be fired. Probably. But if I do it for you, I'll make sure everyone knows you were actively involved. I'll tell them you were the one who gave her access to my computer, that you helped her plan everything. By the time I'm done, you won't just be fired, you'll be unemployable." Marcus stared at me, and I saw something I'd never seen from him before. Respect, maybe, or fear, either worked. The next day, Marcus went to Simon and confessed his involvement. He was fired within the hour, but he'd managed to frame it as unwitting cooperation rather than active sabotage. I didn't care. I just wanted him gone. With both Gemma and Marcus out of the company, I felt a sense of completion, but there was still one more piece of justice I wanted. He agreed to meet me at a pub near the office, clearly curious about why I wanted to talk. Marcus was ambitious and self-serving, and I'd never liked him, but I also knew he was a gossip and that he'd been close to Gemma during her final months at the company. "I wanted to ask you about Gemma," I said, sliding into the booth across from him. "I know you two were friends." He looked uncomfortable. "We were friendly. I wouldn't say friends exactly. She told me some things before she left, about conversations you two had, about plans you discussed." His discomfort increased visibly. "What kind of plans?" "Plans to undermine me, to sabotage my accounts, to make me look incompetent so there'd be room for both of you to advance." Gemma had a large social media following. She'd always been good at presenting a perfect image online, all inspirational quotes and carefully curated photos of brunch and sunsets. After losing her job, she'd taken to posting vague references to difficult times and learning who your real friends are, positioning herself as the victim of some unnamed injustice. Her followers, who didn't know the truth, flooded her with supportive comments. It made me sick to watch. I considered exposing her publicly, posting everything I knew for the world to see, but that felt beneath me, and it would have made me look petty and vindictive. I needed a subtler approach. Instead, I reached out to some of Gemma's closest friends from outside our circle. Women she'd known from university, from her Birmingham days, from various points in her life. I did it carefully, framing my questions as concern for her well-being after everything that had happened. What I discovered was illuminating. I wasn't the first person Gemma had turned on. In university, she'd had a falling out with a flatmate that had seemed mysterious at the time. The flatmate, a woman named Priya, had apparently been accused of stealing Gemma's boyfriend, had been ostracized by their social group, and had eventually transferred to a different university. When I tracked Priya down and told her my story, she was shocked, but not surprised. "I always knew there was something off about Gemma," she told me over a video call. "She was so sweet on the surface, but there was this coldness underneath. And after what happened with me, I learned that she'd been spreading rumors about me for months before everything blew up. I just couldn't prove it." I found similar stories from other people. A colleague from her first job who'd been subtly undermined until she quit. A friend from her Birmingham days who'd been ghosted after getting engaged before Gemma. A pattern of jealousy and sabotage stretching back years, always carefully hidden, always deniable. I compiled everything into a document, not for publication, but for circulation among the people who mattered. I shared it with our mutual friends, with former colleagues, with anyone who might otherwise believe Gemma's version of events. I wasn't cruel about it. I didn't editorialize or exaggerate. I just presented the facts, the screenshots, the notebook entries, the testimony from others who'd been hurt. The response was overwhelming. People who had always thought Gemma was lovely began to see the patterns. Friends who had believed her claims of victimhood started asking questions. Her support network, so carefully cultivated over years, began to crumble. Within a month, Gemma had deleted most of her social media accounts. The last thing she posted, before disappearing, was a single line. "Sometimes the people you trust most are the ones who destroy you." The irony was almost too perfect. My wedding to James took place on a beautiful spring day, 2 months after Gemma vanished from my life. My sister stood beside me, glowing in her maid of honor dress. My mum, cancer in remission, and looking healthier than she had in years, cried happy tears in the front row. James and I exchanged vows we'd written ourselves, promising to be honest with each other always, to protect each other from anyone who tried to hurt us. I didn't think about Gemma during the ceremony. She didn't deserve space in that moment. But later, at the reception, as I watched my friends and family dancing and laughing, I allowed myself a moment of reflection. I had lost my best friend of 15 years. That wound would take time to heal, maybe longer than I could imagine. But I had also gained something valuable, the knowledge that I could survive betrayal, that I could fight back against injustice, and that I was stronger than I'd ever realized. 6 months after the wedding, I received an email from an unfamiliar address. The subject line simply said, "I'm sorry." It was from Gemma. A long, rambling message that veered between apology and accusation, between taking responsibility and blaming external circumstances. She'd had a hard childhood, she wrote. She'd always felt inadequate compared to me. She'd never meant for things to go so far. She just wanted me to understand. I read the email once, then deleted it without responding. Understanding wasn't the same as forgiving, and forgiveness, I had learned, wasn't always the right choice. The last I heard, Gemma had moved back to Birmingham to live with her mother. She was working in a shop somewhere, far removed from the glamorous London life she'd always coveted. Mutual acquaintances occasionally mentioned seeing her, and they all said the same thing. She looked tired, diminished, nothing like the confident woman she'd once pretended to be. I tried to feel satisfaction at that. Sometimes I succeeded, but mostly I just felt a profound sadness for what we'd lost, or rather, for what had never really existed in the first place. My career continued to flourish. The cosmetics account became the biggest success of my professional life, leading to a promotion to senior account manager, and then, a year later, to creative director. I built a team of talented, trustworthy people who supported each other genuinely, without hidden agendas or secret resentments. I'd learned to recognize the signs of toxicity, and I was careful to never let anyone get close enough to betray me again, without proving themselves first. James and I bought a house in South London, a Victorian terrace with a garden where our daughter could play. We named her Lily, after his grandmother, and she had his eyes and my stubbornness. When she was old enough to understand, I would tell her about friendship and trust and betrayal. I would teach her to be kind, but also to be cautious, to love deeply, but also to protect herself. I would not raise her to be naive, the way I had been. Sometimes, late at night, I would think about Gemma. I'd wonder if she ever thought about me, if she ever truly understood what she'd done, if she ever felt genuine remorse. I'd wonder if, in some alternate universe, we could have remained friends, if her jealousy could have been addressed and healed instead of festering into hatred. But those thoughts never lasted long. Gemma had made her choices, and I had made mine. She had chosen betrayal, and I had chosen justice. She had tried to destroy my life, and instead, I had dismantled hers. Some people might say that revenge is never the answer, that I should have taken the high road, that responding to cruelty with cruelty only perpetuates the cycle. And maybe they're right. Maybe there was a better way to handle everything. But sitting in my beautiful house, with my loving husband and my perfect daughter, watching the life I'd built for myself unfold exactly as I'd always dreamed, I couldn't bring myself to regret anything. Gemma had taught me something valuable, even if the lesson had been painful. She'd taught me that the people closest to you can be the most dangerous, that trust should be earned, not given freely, that when someone shows you who they really are, you should believe them. And most importantly, she'd taught me that I was capable of fighting back, that I didn't have to be a victim, that I could take control of my own story and write an ending where justice prevailed. The day I realized my best friend hated me was the worst day of my life. But the days that followed, the days of planning and patience and ultimately triumph, were the days that showed me who I really was. And that person, I decided, was someone worth being. Years have passed since those dark days. My daughter is in school now, making her own friendships, navigating the complex social landscape of childhood. I watch her carefully, not with paranoia, but with awareness. I've taught her about honesty and loyalty, about speaking up when something feels wrong, about trusting her instincts. She came home one day, about 6 months ago, upset because a girl in her class had been saying mean things about her behind her back, a girl she'd thought was her friend. As I held her and listened to her cry, I felt a familiar ache in my chest. Sometimes, I told her, choosing my words carefully, people pretend to be your friend when they're not really, and it hurts a lot when you find out. But the important thing is that you found out. Now you know who she really is, and you can protect yourself. But why would she do that? Lily asked, her eyes wet with tears. I was nice to her. Some people have things inside them that make them act badly. It's not your fault, and it doesn't mean anything about you. It just means she wasn't a good friend. Lily nodded, absorbing this wisdom. Then she looked up at me with the clarity that only children possess. What should I do now? I smiled, remembering my own journey from victim to victor. Be polite, be kind, but don't trust her with anything important, and focus on the friends who treat you well. The people who really love you will show you every single day, not just when it's convenient for them. She seemed satisfied with that answer, and she went off to play. But I sat there for a long time, thinking about how different my life might have been if someone had given me that advice when I was her age. If I'd recognized Gemma's jealousy earlier, if I'd paid attention to the signs instead of explaining them away. But regret was pointless. Everything that had happened had led me here, to this life, to this family, to this version of myself that was wiser and stronger than the naive girl who'd handed tissues to a crying stranger in a school bathroom all those years ago. I still don't know if Gemma ever found happiness after everything fell apart. I don't know if she learned from her mistakes or if she's out there somewhere, repeating the same patterns with new victims. Part of me hopes she got help, genuinely changed, found peace. Another part of me hopes she's miserable forever. Both parts of me have made peace with the uncertainty. What I do know is that I survived. I thrived. I built a life filled with love and success and genuine connection. And when someone tried to tear it all down out of jealousy and spite, I protected what was mine and made sure they faced the consequences of their actions. That's not petty revenge. That's justice. And justice, I've learned, is its own kind of peace. I close my eyes sometimes and remember the good times with Gemma, the sleepovers and the secrets, the dreams we shared and the plans we made. For a moment, I can almost pretend that none of the bad stuff happened, that we're still best friends growing old together, watching our kids play while we drink wine and laugh about the old days. But then I remember the notebook, the screenshots, the calculated cruelty, and the nostalgia dissolves like morning fog, leaving only the clarity of truth. Gemma was never my best friend. She was a predator pretending to be prey, a wolf in sheep's clothing, a smiling enemy who waited 15 years to strike. And I was never her victim. I was just the woman who took a little longer to realize who she really was. The story I've told here isn't pretty, it's not uplifting or inspirational in the traditional sense. But it's true, every painful word of it. And if my experience helps even one person recognize the signs of a toxic friendship before it's too late, then sharing it was worth the pain of remembering. Trust your instincts, pay attention to the patterns, and when someone shows you their true face, don't look away, because the people who love you will prove it every day, in 1,000 small ways, and the people who hate you will eventually prove that too. The only question is whether you'll be ready when they do. I was ready. And now finally, I'm at peace.